We're going to continue talking about the cell membrane. My video cut off there, but last I said is that the cell membrane was a bilayer of phospholipids. If we zoom in over here, you can take a look at that. This is a cell membrane of a cell, and if you zoom in, you can see this is the two layers of the phospholipid molecule. That's what this is here, a phospholipid molecule. It's actually made up of a bunch of carbon and hydrogens and a bit of oxygen and phosphorus in there. And you learn more about that chemistry later on as well in grade 12 biology. So it's part of that biochemistry unit, which is really fun to connect the two concepts together, right? So a living cell is made up of non-living molecules, which is a really, really neat thing to think about. So anytime there's an organelle with a membrane, though, like a mitochondrion has a membrane, or the nuclear membrane, or the membranes of the ER, or the membranes of the Golgi, or this over here we'll learn about later on called a vesicle or vacuole sometimes. Anything there's a membrane-bound organelle, anytime you have that, it's made up of these things called phospholipids. So phospholipids make up membranes. Things that don't have membranes would be like the ribosomes. They don't have membranes, they're not membrane-bound organelles. That's why all cells have it. Cytoplasm is not a membrane-bound organelle, for example. Cytoskeleton is not a membrane-bound organelle. So we're going to take a look at different organelles, and a lot of them are membrane-bound, and so it basically means they have a phospholipid bilayer or layer that makes them up. Next, we'll take a look at what's called a vacuole. So this here's a vacuole. A vacuole will essentially serve as storage. So in animal cells, you have these small vacuoles, and they store water and other materials for the cell. Typically, animal cells have many small vacuoles inside of them. But a plant cell, let's zoom in here. This is a plant cell. So far all the organelles that we've seen are the same sort of in both plants and animals. But the vacuole, here's our first main difference. In animal cells, there's a lot of many small ones like this, and it's not the largest organelle. But in the plant cell, you'll see it over here, this is the vacuole of a plant. It's larger than even its nucleus. So the plant cell's vacuole is a very large vacuole. There's only one of them inside the plant cell, and it's called the central vacuole inside of the plant cell. So in a plant cell, the more specific term is the central vacuole. And it's really important for storing things like pigments and nutrients and water. And if you think about it, it makes sense that a plant cell has a very large one. As an animal, typically, if you want water, you can go grab some water and drink. Whereas a plant cell can't really, you've never seen a plant come into your home, grab a bottle of water from the fridge or water from the tap and then, drink. It needs to store things more often because they don't really move around. So a larger storage mechanism for the plant would make sense from an evolutionary point of view. So this is our first spot where we saw a main difference between animal cells and plant cells with respect to an organelle. Many small vacuoles in animals, a larger one in plant cells. Next, we're going to take a look at what's called the vesicles. Vesicles and vacuoles in animal cells and plant cells sometimes are interchangeable. If you called this one here a vesicle, I'd be okay with that. If you called this one here a vacuole, I'd be fine with that too. So vesicles are basically just small membranes that are called taxicabs. They deliver some substances throughout the material. They transport substances throughout the cell. So for example, if I had a protein made over here and I had to go to the Golgi, well, a little vesicle, a transport vesicle, will deliver my protein from the rough ER all the way to the Golgi. And then if the Golgi had to deliver that protein somewhere else, like outside or to the membrane, then a vesicle would transport that protein once it's done to the membrane or somewhere else. So vesicles are the taxicabs or the Ubers in today's world. They deliver things throughout the cell. They transport things. They're also membrane bound, so they have phospholipids that make them up too. They're usually a bit smaller than vacuoles though, so this is the better option for a vacuole, and this is the better option for a vesicle. Here you can see an example of a vesicle. So this here is a protein product that was made, and the vesicle is transporting the protein product to the membrane over here to spit out the protein product so that it can go to other cells. So if you were looking at this inside here, the vesicle would be kind of over here somewhere, over here, over here. This is the Golgi. The vesicle would be spat out by the Golgi with the protein product, and it would be traveling to the membrane, so just like this, and then it would merge with the membrane and then spit out the protein product so it could go to its final destination. Then we get to lysosomes. So this is another difference between plants and animals. Plants have another extra membrane-bound organelle called a lysosome. Animals have this, not plants, animals. And so we often label the vesicle and lysosome as one and the same. A vesicle is not a lysosome. It's just that in pictures it's hard to tell them apart. So if I show you this over here, if you labeled it a vesicle, it would be good. If you labeled it a lysosome, it would be good. Just never in plants, because plants don't have lysosomes. So plants don't have lysosomes, animals do. Lysosomes are membrane-bound organelles. They're almost like vesicles, but what they have inside of them are digestive enzymes. Digestive enzymes basically help to break things down. So let's say something dangerous comes into the cell. The lysosome will swallow that dangerous thing and then chop it up with the digestive enzymes and spit it out. So it helps to defend things and defend a cell and break things down within the cell. So lysosomes are like specialized vesicles that have these digestive enzymes that break things down, like pathogens. Pathogens are dangerous things, or even worn out parts you don't need anymore. We break it down to use their parts in other parts of the cell. And so the lysosome will do that. Again, this is not in plants, it's only in animals. So there's another difference between the animal cell and the plant cell. So here you can see it's a membrane-bound organelle, the lysosome. So it has a membrane, and on the inside there's these digestive enzymes called hydrolytic enzymes that help to break things apart. So as I said, lysosomes and vacuoles are different, but and also vesicles. So lysosomes and vesicles and vacuoles, they're very different. They all look similar in pictures. So sometimes it's okay if you label the vacuole as a lysosome, or the vesicle as a lysosome, or the lysosome. Over here, I added an extra picture of a lysosome here to show you that it has a slightly different shape sometimes, but they're all pretty interchangeable. Their functions are different, but I'm saying that in pictures, it's okay if you somewhat name them by different things. So one student might call this the vacuole, this the vesicle, this lysosome. Another might call this the vacuole, this the vesicle, and this the lysosome, and that would be okay on an assessment, for example. But if I gave you more clues, like this is a special membrane-bound organelle that breaks things down, you would call this lysosome if I gave you that clue. Or if I said this is a special membrane-bound organelle that's responsible for storage, then you would call it the vacuole. So don't get too confused with that. Or if I said this over here is a special membrane-bound organelle that helps to transport things specifically, then you would call it a vesicle. So again, try not to get too confused. Try to understand they look very similar because they're just membrane-bound organelles, and what's different is sort of what's on the inside of them. Now we're going to go and take a look at the cytoskeleton. So the cytoskeleton is not really given the best image here. It's represented by these little hairs. And in reality, the cytoskeleton is kind of everywhere. It's all over. So you can see more hairs here, more hairs there, more hairs there, more hairs there. So a cytoskeleton is almost like the skeleton of the cell. It's a framework of filaments that helps to maintain the structure of the cell, so it prevents it from collapsing. It also serves as like little ropes that things can climb onto and climb around with and move around with as well, almost like little train tracks in the cell as well. So cytoskeleton is super important. It allows the cell to maintain its structure and stability. Here you can see a picture of basically all this green stuff here, all this green stuff, and also even some of the red hairs as well. That's part of the cytoskeleton. So, let's go back for a second. This is a picture taken under a microscope, a special type of microscope. Not all microscopes look this pretty. This has some color essentially added to it, so you can keep track of where things are. You can see here a nice round organelle or spherical organelle, one of the bigger ones in this animal cell here, and that's the nucleus. So eventually you'll get used to taking a look at cells under the microscope and understanding where the different parts are. You can see the outer parts of the cell as well, right? So a cell membrane, for example. So We're now going to take a look at the plant cell. So in the previous videos, we focused on the animal cells. We did mention a few differences. For example, we saw the lysosomes and we saw the vacuoles being different. But we're going to go zoom into the plant cell a bit more and take a look at a few differences that the plant cells have, which animal cells don't have. And by the end of the last video we're going to see, you'll know all the organelles of plant cells and animal cells, and you'll know major differences and similarities between plant cells and animal cells. So we'll stop this video here, and in the next one we'll go into plant cells in more detail.